Welcome, everyone. We are joined by George and Jeremy today. Many of you already know these gentlemen, but real quick, George, quick introduction of yourself, and then Jeremy, please follow.
All right. Well, my name is George Jage. I've been technically in the cannabis industry for 40 years when I started an herbal distribution business in high school. But I have effectively been employed in the cannabis industry when I came in and took over MJ BizCon in 2014 and built that event. And that company left in 2017. I'll throw a little background in here for our new company. Ran Dope Magazine for a couple of years, helped create the exit for that company to High Times, for better or worse. And we launched MJ Unpacked back in 2019, or at least started the company. We launched our first event in 2021. And really just from 30 years of experience in the trade show space, cannabis is a consumer packaged goods industry. And the end game for trade show is going to be a brand and retail focused event, not a supplier focused event, which is why we've created MJ Unpacked and why we are possibly the only show that's growing given the current market conditions, because we qualify everybody that comes in the room to make sure they're a decision maker and really focus on building platforms for brands to go national.
Great, thank you. Jeremy?
Awesome. My name is Jeremy. I currently work for a e-commerce company in the cannabis space called Dispense. We power online menus for retailers across the industry. And previous to that, my experience was on the retail side. And before that, it was as a caregiver for about 10 years. I was lucky enough that when I turned 18, Michigan passed the Caregiver Act and got involved right away. And spent about 10 years in that space before transitioning into recreational around 2018, 2019 when we voted. And I ran digital marketing for two of the largest non-vertically integrated cannabis retailers in the state of Michigan. But my previous experience with technology and e-commerce specifically led me to wanting to move back to the software side, because I saw a lot of gaps that were not being filled. And Jake, we've had this conversation plenty of times, but primarily on the iFriend side, I was just so limited with my ability to market online that I wanted to help provide a better solution for other retailers. So here we are.
Great, thank you. I'm Jake Litke. I'm the CEO of MediaJel. We do digital marketing for cannabis and other regulated brands. And the goal here today is we're going to talk a little bit about the scheduling of cannabis. And, a lot of conversations that we have online are a lot of agreement, but we're going to try to argue a little bit today about what's going on with policy. HHS recently recommended changing the schedule for cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which in my mind is good from a marketer's perspective, because marketing dollars don't get written off, and so it creates a tax burden. But there are other knock-on effects of that. So let's start. George, why don't you start off with explaining how you see the change that would happen if we take cannabis from Schedule 1, which is basically this sort of no man's federal don't play here land, and put it into the hands of the FDA.
Sure. Listen, I think the three biggest challenges that the licensed operators face in today's economy is overtaxation, overregulation, which is causing them to have to compete against the illicit market. Kind of also the issues around the Farm Bill that kind of created this backdoor, adulterated hemp-derived cannabinoid market that we also have to compete against, and a lack of capital investment in the space. The announcement by the HHS is, I think, it has to be most profoundly understood that this is the first time our federal government has ever agreed and acknowledged the fact that cannabis has a medical benefit, which everybody in the industry knows it does. A lot of us use it for medicine, and it has a low potential for abuse versus Schedule 1, which has no medical benefit and a high potential for abuse. And the fact that it was scheduled higher than fentanyl, and still is technically, was absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know, I just watched this series Painkiller on Netflix. If you have a chance, watch it.
Is it good? I haven't seen it yet.
It's deeply saddening of what the Sackler family did to, and what the U.S. government, was complicit in, of selling heroin into the market through trusted advisors. But without digressing into that rabbit hole, Listen, I mean, it's going to take a little bit of time. I know that there's been a lot of chatter on LinkedIn. I do not believe that, the federal government, the Department of Justice, and the FDA that have consistently for the last couple of years since the Cole Memorandum not interfered with state markets' ability to regulate its own cannabis market will change now that it's actually becoming more legalized, right? It's moving down the ladder and becoming safer. So I think that people's kind of like screaming and concern, listen, we haven't had a lot of trust in the federal government as an industry, but the concern about the federal government kind of getting more proactive in over regulating our industry, I think is a little bit of a stretch. Who's to say what's going to happen? We obviously have a big election coming up next year. Not a lot of good choices on the ballot, in my opinion. But we obviously would hope that the DEA would then turn around and recommend to the Department of Justice to move this to a Schedule 3, be able to avoid some of the complications with the international treaties that have prevented us from doing this previously to Schedule 2, by moving it to Schedule 3, and accompany it with a revised Cole Memorandum, whether that's the Garland Memorandum or whatever, that clearly states that the federal government will not enforce any type of criminal prosecution against markets that are operating that are state legal, as long as they're keeping it out of the hands of kids, as long as there's not any racketeering or money laundering or other illegal activities going on with it. And then obviously the interstate commerce issue, which is also we're closer to that. California can move forward and say, hey, we're going to open up interstate commerce to adjoining states. If Oregon, Washington, Nevada, New Mexico, could even reach up into Colorado. I mean, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico probably shouldn't be growing indoor weed, to be honest. It's a very water intensive process, and there's a big problem with fresh water in that Southwest region. So anyways, there's so many factors we could go into. I'll shut up so we can give Jeremy and yourself some time.
All right, well, we'll turn over to Jeremy in a second, but there's a lot of opacity in terms of what might happen. But overall, kind of what we're talking about today is if the government accepts HHS recommendation, do you have a positive or negative feeling about that outcome given what we know today? That's for you, George.
For George.
Yeah, I was asking you that, George, because we covered a lot of things. Before we hand over to Jeremy.
Oh, back to me.
Was that a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Absolutely. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a positive. Period. It is a positive as a move forward. Pharmaceutical industry is not going to come in and try to hijack our industry. They're not going to force us into Walgreens and Rite Aid. If anything, it's going to open up research. It's going to increase the medical applications of cannabis. It's going to increase the acceptance of cannabis and acknowledge that it is not a overtly harmful substance to society, far more than it did as Schedule 1.
Okay, perfect. So lots of potential positive outcomes. Jeremy, you have the floor. What is your take on things?
I tend to agree. I think it's mostly positive here, on my end, I have no idea what's really going to happen. I think there's so many open-ended questions here. I think it's going to be positive, and I think the biggest positive change here is the general perception of cannabis being Schedule 3 versus Schedule 1, especially when you talk about things like research and the medical side of it. There are doctors out there who will not prescribe you certain medications if you admit to your cannabis use because it is Schedule 1. Schedule 2 would have been the same thing. Schedule 3 is the bare minimum to change that. And it starts, they're admitting that it has medical use cases. And I think that change goes much further than people realize, from everything from doctors and medication to community perception as well. There are people that still fully believe that because cannabis is Schedule 1, that it should be completely illegal, even if they live in a state like Michigan where it's legal, and they won't accept cannabis dollars, and so as we start to change this perception, I think that opens up cannabis to a lot more opportunities and helps people change minds. If we move to Schedule 3, what's to say Wisconsin might finally change their mind? I have very little hope that
Hey,
that'll happen.
I'm from Wisconsin. Yeah, you betcha, So just be careful there.
Yeah,
Yeah, you betcha.
I, I I know most of Michigan is enjoying the money from Wisconsin right now. Same with Illinois. But that's the type of change that I think it'll take for a state like Wisconsin, or even if I want to pick on another state like Idaho to really change, because you have these people that are so literal, that are like, nope, it's federally illegal. We don't even want to consider it. And moving to Schedule 3 starts that conversation, and that's what I'm excited about. Obviously, 280E is massive from a financial perspective, but me personally, I'm more excited from a cultural and like societal change here.
Yeah. Can I just add on to what Jeremy said is don't misunderrepresent the number of people from Illinois that come up to Michigan to buy weed, because you guys grow a lot better weed up there.
And
It's
have
also
lower
less
taxes.
expensive.
Yeah. Better
Okay,
weed, lower taxes.
yeah, I think the scheduling, from a medical standpoint and doctor standpoint, would have an impact. I don't know that the average consumer understands Schedule 1 versus Schedule 2 versus 3. I think it does unlock some market perceptions and the things that people can do from a marketing perspective. Now, the schedule change, I think, makes everything easier, from a tax perspective, from a regulation perspective. But what are the downsides, right? Because we are talking about a change here where the federal government has not been involved in an active way other than, arresting people. So once it goes to Schedule 3, we now have some sort of federal governance that is going to be in charge of that category. Where do we start to run into problems? Like the FDA, approval process is long. I don't know if it's going to have to go through that, but getting something through the FDA today takes potentially years. Where does cannabis fall there? Like, do we end up, is it grandfathered in? It's already in the market. Is it, we have to start over? How do you see that playing out?
I mean, could it be done on a blanket level? I mean, if cannabis is generally recognized as safe, as long as, and then if you're manufacturing a new product or adding in new, cannabinoids, minor cannabinoids, or anything else, that there has to be some type of approval process through the FDA. But this isn't like, where the natural products industry, which went through this very similarly, it's not like, hey, we've got this new nutraceutical that needs to go through approval process. It's basically the nutraceutical is the same for everybody. I mean, or the nutraceuticals, if we're talking about the variety of minor cannabinoids, CBG, CBN, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really great question. Certainly, I mean, I think that, most operators and certainly the brands would trade the 80% marginal tax rates for having to spend, some extra money to get approvals for products that then they would have some intellectual property protection for, if they're truly unique products that are not just flower, right? I should reach out to some old friends from the natural products industry, including Mark Blumenthal, who runs American Botanical Council and he produces monoliths on all sorts of herbs. So I think, once that the herb is basically approved by the FDA, I don't know if it's going to be that onerous of a process, but I'm not an expert on that. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a little, and again, I would defer to more experts here. There's some great people out there that if you want to read, Andrew Klein, Shane Pennington, like they have a lot more knowledge, and look them up on LinkedIn if you're not already following them. But I have a hard time seeing the FDA even accepting to regulate this right now. Like maybe
they might punt to the states, right?
Yeah, I mean they've already declined to regulate CBD. They've already said we're hands off. We don't have the facilities to do that. We don't have the resources to do it. I really don't think that will happen. If it does, obviously it could have some incredibly detrimental effects to the industry. And I think that's what people are very much up in arms about, is the what if they do decide to regulate it. And some people might call me ignorant or blissful for thinking that the FDA won't regulate it, but I truly believe they'll stay hands off here. And if they don't, I think states will fight back too. I mean, look at the tax revenue from states who've set it up successfully. Not every state is really getting all the benefit on the tax level, but from the ones that have set it up successfully, it's serious impact to their bottom line. I mean, Michigan, again, as an example, like, I really don't think they're going to just go, okay, well, there goes our entire recreational program. Like, it's done. That was a cool 3 years, guys.
Yep, not just the recreational market, but the second largest adult use market in the United States. And that's why we're bringing MJ Unpacked to Detroit next month on October 10th to the 12th. Shameless plug, sorry. I want to throw in one other thing though, Jake. I mean, like, there's a lot of other ramifications from this. And again, you know, I'm reading a lot of information, talking to a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me about this. But you know, the federal government has had a massive problem being able to fill its own positions, especially in the military services, that, you know, would prevent somebody from joining that as a cannabis consumer. This would eliminate that. It's believed that, you know, the federal workers wouldn't be subject to it. Now, certain agencies may set policy, maybe if you're working for the NSA or one of the other three-lettered spook agencies, that might not want you to be using drugs. But again, this could be a game changer on a federal level to allow federal workers to use cannabis. Now, it also may allow you to be able to bill as a medical patient your cannabis consumption to your insurance agency as medicine. That could be another huge potential, which again, create an influx of revenue to the industry that we sorely need. And you know, I don't want to kind of skip over the elephant in the room. I mean, we have had an abject failure of leadership and at a federal level for cannabis since the industry started. And unfortunately, I believe that most of our politicians are grifters looking for who's going to pay them the most money. And we haven't been able to bribe them effectively enough to this point. The people who could bribe them are the alcohol and tobacco lobbies that have a lot of money. They have business plans in place, marketing plans in place, IP in place to come into the cannabis industry. Going Schedule 3 isn't necessarily a bad thing because they're ready to jump at this and they want to get a big part of this market, especially alcohol that's shown to have decreased sales in states that have legalized cannabis. It's a good and a bad thing for them to come in. It'll certainly elevate the industry. It adds layers of distribution, operational capital, and operational efficiency that can come into this industry. But to come in when we're at our weakest after, you know, years of blood, sweat, and tears for these operators that are, you know, walking away from their businesses every day, and for them to come in and just brush us as an industry and take over if they deschedule completely, I think would be a shame because we'd lose a thought leadership for our industry. And that needs to stay with cannabis people.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm excited about the potential again is more money back in the pockets of cannabis companies to lobby with. You know, everybody's got difference of opinions on this, but one of the things that I personally think is keeping cannabis in a Schedule I and federally illegal state and holding us back quite a bit is Mitch McConnell and the private prison industry. You know, if we can compete with a lobbyist on the private prison side, that's a massive win. I mean, cannabis is the easiest thing to put people in prison for right now. In the United States, it's the easiest thing. So many people use it and the penalties on it are so high. Other than like illegally crossing the border and just being a human, having cannabis on you is the easy. I should rephrase that. There's probably one easier way to get put in prison, and that's being a human and crossing a border. That's probably the easiest way to do it because you're barely doing anything other than being alive. But having cannabis on you is the next easiest way. And taking that away from private prisons is a huge win for our industry, and taking that away from politicians like Mitch McConnell as well. I don't think it can be understated how important that aspect is, and being able to compete with these people on a lobbying level, like that is massive.
Yeah, that is. Go ahead, George.
We're all in the media space at some level. Obviously, you know, you guys are providing a robust platform to help people reach a broad audience across a diverse application of platforms. Jeremy with a lot of the in-store and reaching the dispensaries and targeting the consumers, you know, for the dispensaries, and us running a business-to-business trade show. But I'd like to, you know, your two opinions. I mean, you know, what this means for people's ability to advertise in newspapers, online, Google, Facebook that shadow ban us. I mean, you guys have taken a look at this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, in that category, you have, you know, most of, call it 70% of digital media is controlled by one of a handful of companies, right? Facebook, Google, etc. Those are large publicly traded companies. They can't really play in that market while things are that illegal. If you look at it from a CFO perspective, no matter how big the cannabis industry is, jeopardizing Google or Facebook's advertising revenue with some sort of federal issue is just not worth it, right? So they have to keep a line, which is that we can't play in this space. I don't know if descheduling changes that entirely, but it will certainly make things easier. You do still have to run across, the thousands of different laws that happen in every single state, because they all have different laws of what you can and can't do. But again, much like what happens when it's opened up, when alcohol brands can come in, it will change the space a lot. And it's hard to predict what will happen.
Yeah. I think when I think about it, I try to think about real world examples for like normal people. And something that came up this comes up a lot in my life, but like I've gone to a lot of local financial advisors and asked if they, it's like, okay, I'm growing in my career. I want to create a financial plan. Like, would you be willing to help me? And once they find out what my job is in cannabis, they're like, sorry, we can't help you because there's so many regulations in place on them. There's probably people out there that can, or are willing to at the very least, but that's another thing that like changes with this. I'm guessing they're not telling the Sackler family that they can't financially advise them, like once we get into Schedule 3, 4, and 5, that opens up so many opportunities. I don't know if Google or Facebook or some of these other people will jump in, but I think it strengthens the case to allow them to jump in, just like it would for somebody that's in a financial advisor position, or even banks that are lending to home buyers. I got denied probably 3 times before I found a company that would give me a home loan. And I'm guessing a lot of that has to do with cannabis being Schedule 1.
Yeah, and there's, like I said, with those federal laws, especially with finance people, they have to pay attention to very specific rules, and there's really no gray area for them.
Yeah.
We are MediaJel, we're not a plant touching company, we're a technology service provider. But we early on, we had our bank account just shut down. No cause given, but I can tell you why it was. They just sent you a check, here's your balance, see you later.
Yeah.
As many people in the cannabis industry understand, and maybe other people don't, it's real hard to run a business without a bank account.
I think a lot of people in cannabis did for a long time, but
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's easy.
I was running BizCon. Like I'd say 80% of the people showed up on site and paid for the registration in cash. It was a little bit of a challenge back then. It's gotten a lot better. There's plenty of banks out there that'll bank the cannabis industry, and they're moving away from charging points on their deposits to actually paying yields because the interest rates have gone up. At least some good banks that are doing that, but it's the general lack of access to capital. Most of the VCs that are out there haven't provided any round trips to their investors, so they can't raise more money. The private investors have already put too many place bets out that they haven't made money on yet, so they're not going to put more money out. And there's no private equity or institutional capital. I think one of the other most exciting things is TerraSend moving up to the Toronto Stock Exchange. That's an actual exchange with liquidity, and I'm not in the mindset that it's MSOs versus the independents. I think that everybody's got a role to play, and we need both. But a rising tide can lift everybody's boat. It could open up for other companies to move to that exchange, eliminate the tax debt and the toxic debt that they have on their balance sheets, and write their companies to be profitable. And if there's exuberance on a retail level for Wall Street to invest into cannabis, it's going to increase the investment into the private companies too.
That's a good point, George. We hadn't touched on that, but talking to our investors and when I've done fundraising, it is a small pool of funds and family offices that are even able to put money into cannabis related businesses. And that's been, I've had conversations where people are like, oh, I'm excited about your business. This looks good. I want to be a part of this, but you're touching cannabis. And we have one of our LPs is a sovereign fund somewhere.
Yeah, bullshit.
Yeah. So yeah, that really does touch a lot of things: law enforcement, investing, taxes, public perception,
Employment. I mean, there's a lot of people that, have to hide their cannabis use from their employers right now, but you can go to work, and suck down a martini at lunch.
or three. It's not the banker's lunch, right?
Are you buying lunch? Because that sounds good.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll catch you in Detroit.
I'd like that.
Yeah.
Employment, I think, is a huge one too. I don't know if I have a ton of faith in some of the businesses out there to act on this, but like if you look at an average job posting for cannabis retail or something cannabis touching, you'll notice that a lot of them only pay a percentage of health coverage, for example. They'll say we'll pay 80%. It's not unusual for retail specifically. It's definitely unusual for like in the tech space, but like a lot of that is too because they can't write off those costs. And so I'm hopeful that as they become more financially free, we'll have better benefits flow in, and that'll bring more talent into cannabis. I mean, how many people do you guys know? I know you both know people that have come in from other industries and been excited at it and tried their hand at it, but then left because it's so stressful. The pay is lower than other industries. The benefits are lower than other industries. Like that alone is holding us back, in my opinion.
I've definitely seen that. I come from the technology advertising space for the last couple decades, and I've seen people come in and be very excited and last a year or two and then leave and be like, it's just too difficult across the board.
I guess there's also an argument to be made that might be a good thing because it keeps the passionate people around. But I think there's a benefit to having people from outside the industry come in. I mean, even though I've been in cannabis since approximately 2008, like my professional experience was in digital advertising, web production, mobile production. Like that has helped me so much in this industry, and knowledge from other areas. Like we can't just get by on knowing how to grow and sell weed. We have to bring other perspectives into this to be a successful industry.
Agree. All right, so we're running up on time here. I mean, we could talk, I think, for a long time about this, but just sort of closing comments on, I think everyone seems to agree that descheduling is good in many ways, but it also has some unpredictable, ramifications that we're not aware of yet. I guess if you could each pick one thing that you would be the most concerned about happening as a negative result to the schedule change, what do you think that would be?
Further uncertainty, and this dragging out for 12 to 18 months for the federal government to set some type of clarity on the regulatory process. Like Jeremy mentioned before, the FDA needs to kind of stay out of this, kick it to the states, make it simple, put in a Garland memo to, allow the Department of Justice to recognize states' rights in this matter. And we're one step closer to federal legalization. Give us a year or 2 years under Schedule 3 to grow the industry further, and then open it up to descheduling so that we can have a full industry regulated like alcohol.
Yeah, I would agree. Uncertainty is massive. And if the FDA does step in and overregulate, that would be probably the biggest con of them all. Like that would be brutal to our industry. But I think more likely, in my opinion, the biggest downside of this right now is just the division across people in the industry. There are people out there who are saying this is the end of everything for state medical and rec programs, and saying if you do support Schedule 3 that you're grifting or greedy or some other reason. And I just think they're missing the bigger point and creating a further division when we should all be working together towards the same goals. And so I hope that people maybe after the long holiday weekend can take a deep breath and think about it, read a little bit more, and realize that we can work together towards this goal. And moving cannabis from Schedule 1 to 3 is the first step in a very long process. Like by no means is this ideal, but this is the first step we're taking, and it is progress at the end of the day.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Let's wrap this up. Appreciate your time. Real quick, as a follow-up here, how can people reach you? Maybe remind everyone. I know you've got your sign up there, MJ Unpacked in Detroit, October 10th through 12th. It's a great event. I've been to it in Vegas and New York, met a lot of great people.
Thank you.
Anything else, George, you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, we're excited about Detroit, about Michigan as a market. And it's not just a Detroit, it's not just a Michigan show. We have registrations coming in from Ohio and Illinois, Minnesota, East Coast. It's about an opportunity to expand your business. We did partner with Fairchild, so we're going to have an official after party in partnership with Fairchild and Sensi Magazine. We're super excited about that. It will be consumption friendly. Yeah, this is a key turn point. I think you need to get to, you're in the game. You got to show up and you got to find the right partners to get to the next level. It's going to move quick.
Great. And Jeremy?
Yeah, you can always find me on LinkedIn. That's where I live most of the time. But if you want to meet in real life, upcoming, I'll be at Benzinga later this month. I'll be at the Ohio Cannabis Business Summit. Might take a stop by MJ Unpacked. I think it's the week after, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. And then I'll also be at BizCon presenting on SEO for retailers come November. So a busy fall. I'm sure we'll all get plenty of chances to run into each other.
Awesome.
Fall does get busy.
Yeah.
Sure.
Lots of conferences, lots of events.
Thanks.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks for your time. And we'll circle back when we hear maybe some next steps.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Everyone.